Sigaliswagway, welcome to day 3 of the Indigenous Farming Symposium. This is our last day, so thank you for coming and attending. We have some amazing speakers this morning. So I'm going to just give you a little bit of background on who USET is, who I am, and we'll get started. Okay, so this farming symposium is put on in partnership with the Natural Resources Conservation Service. So we have a cooperative agreement with them, and this is one of our outreach events that we're doing with that agreement. United South and Eastern Tribes is a nonprofit that is a member tribal nation organization. So we have 33 member tribal nations from the Northeast Woodlands down to the Everglades and across the Gulf of Mexico. Our website is usetinc.org if you want to learn more about us. We have 3 primary program areas. We have the Tribal Health Support Program, Economic Development, and the Office of Environmental Resource Management. And that's where my program is. So I'm the Agriculture Program Manager, and I work with all the tribes, mostly all the tribes with their agriculture programs and their natural resources programs. So this event was really fun to put on, really fun to plan. I got to work with a lot of amazing leaders who are working on food sovereignty and indigenous ecosystem restoration. And I got to put together these really great gift boxes. So if you would like to receive a package of native made goods from around the region and some of them from outside the region, please make sure to fill out the evaluation. I'll be posting the link for that in the chat towards the end of the event. So you'll have some time at the end of today around 10:45 a.m. Central or 11:45 a.m. Eastern to fill that out. And those evaluations really help us understand how to be better and provide better services to you in the future. So we really appreciate your participation in that today. You'll also have until March 11th at about midday to complete that. So if it's just not in the cards for you today, or you're not able to attend and you're watching a recording afterwards, you do have until March 11th of 2022 to fill that out. Okay, I think that's it. I'm going to hand you off to Christy Harper, who is the Alaska Native Liaison for the Natural Resources Conservation Service, which is an agency of USDA. I will stop.
Good morning. Oh, there you are. Good morning, everybody. And it's quite early up here in a great state of Alaska, and I know it's still morning down your way as well. So great to be here, and thanks, Leah and USET for the invite. A pleasure to be here, and just kind of want to give a brief introduction of myself, and then a brief introduction of the position here with NRCS, and a little bit about our programs and opportunities to work with NRCS. So as Leah mentioned, I'm Christy Harper. I'm the Alaska Native Liaison. I am Tlingit and Lakota, born up here in Juneau, Alaska, primarily raised in Anchorage. And I've been with NRCS for, about almost half of my career, federal career. I've worked with the U.S. Forest Service as well as BIA and a little bit in Montana, NRCS in Rapid City, South Dakota, and then before making my way back home here in Alaska. Recently, I was able to fulfill a detail as the acting National Tribal Liaison for NRCS. It started last year about this time, and just completed the detail at the end of January. And there is a new person that is going to be taking over here shortly, probably within the next couple weeks at most. And once I get the green light to share that individual's name and their bio, I will be sure to share with you, Leah, and you can share with the rest as well. So that's exciting. I do believe we are getting closer to fulfilling the permanent position here, National Tribal Liaison for NRCS. So that's also very exciting and promising. So a little bit about some of the programs. I'll give kind of a big picture national level picture first. As you know, many of you know, maybe, and some of you, NRCS works with a private landowner, but tribes also qualify for a lot of our federal assistance programs, farm bill programs, and we have a lot of new cooperative agreement. They're kind of grant-like opportunities at the national level. The latest and greatest was the Equity and Justice Conservation Cooperative Agreements, and those just got selected not too long ago, and I know they are currently in the process of working with those proposals that were selected to finalize their statements of work and whatnot. Out of, and there was I believe $50 million available for that opportunity this past year. And we received over 200 application or proposals for that. So that's tremendous, but it made it really hard for us to divvy up the $50 million, and we were able to select 118 proposals. I know either this fiscal year or next fiscal year, the opportunity should be there again. So it's I think it's a tremendous opportunity, and I've already heard from tribes across the nation that this pot of funding is really helpful to kind of kickstart some of their programs within the agricultural and natural resources conservation realm. And it also really helps out NRCS with our outreach and reaching those communities where NRCS's footprint hasn't been as big as we want it. So these equity and justice agreements, look for the announcement for program funding, hopefully later this year. Again, the National Tribal Liaison will share that opportunity with you, Leah and USET, and be sure you guys are in the know. So that's a big NRCS-led opportunity. Another one is recently the Office of Urban Agriculture was developed, and don't get scared by the name urban, because those opportunities are open for tribes. They also have lately they had an urban ag grant, as well as a community composting grant, and I do believe those two opportunities will be available again this year as well. And I know a couple tribes up here in Alaska, or one tribal organization and one tribe in Alaska was a recipient of the compost grant. So don't let the term urban scare you. They are available for tribes. That's another good national opportunity. Some of the more local opportunities in your area, we can definitely, Leah and USEC can help put you in touch with the local field offices, and kind of get down to the tribal conservation planning on your property, whether it be for a agricultural operation or a ranching operation. NRCS can come in and help with any technical assistance at the request of the tribe and or landowner. And those generally, if you're interested, a lot of those, after the conservation planning is done, there's our typical farm bill programs, environmental quality incentives program. And that's a cost share type program where we assist with paying for conservation practices implemented on your land. And there's other ones called CSP, the Conservation Stewardship Program, and are probably the two most popular ones throughout the nation. EQIP, the environmental quality up here in Alaska, we use it really frequently. And in fact, the majority of our funding through farm bills goes through the EQIP. So that's kind of our bread and butter up here. But again, if you just want technical assistance, there's no cost to that. You can just request that from the local field office. And you're not obligated to participate in one of our farm bill programs, but if it works out, they're there and available. Some other opportunities, you could also work with your local or regional type tribal liaisons in the area there, and they can also put you in touch with the national office for those bigger cooperative agreements. But other programs we do, I'll just kind of list those off. There's the emergency watershed program. Lately, I think we do have some watershed funding as well that might be of interest to folks down the line. I think that is also a program that they're going to fund again. They just kind of did a first round of applications for these watershed dollars about 2 months ago. It kind of took us by surprise, so we weren't as proactive as we wanted to be to get the message out on that. But that's another opportunity that might be available soon. Yeah, if there's any questions, please feel free to call or email. I'll drop my contact information in the chat and definitely answer any questions that I can.
Thank you, Christy. So if you all have any questions for Christy right now, I'm not sure that she's going to be able to stay on the full 2 hours. She has a pretty big scope with her details. So if you have questions for her, please put them in the chat or raise your hand. I see a question from you, Rue, about what is this program called? Was that about the social justice program?
Yeah, it's the original title was the Racial Equity and Conservation Cooperative Agreements. The announcement for program funding went out, I believe, in October. And it should probably this year again, it should go out about that same time. We did shorten the name to the Equity and Justice Cooperative Agreements. So that might be the new name.
Equity and Justice. Okay.
Yeah.
And I know that we did have 1 or 2 tribes in the USET region that got one of those. So Shinnecock received one of those grants for their tribal farm.
Yep.
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 We're very excited about that.
Yeah, I've received nothing but excitement from those tribes that have, and I do believe it was 14 tribal entities throughout the nation that received one of those. So that's also good news and glad to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll be keeping a really close eye on that program because it is specifically targeted toward what the USDA calls socially disadvantaged farmers and entities. So tribal nations fit within that definition. And so it's a really nice, almost like a national set aside for socially disadvantaged groups. So once that becomes available, I'll make sure to get that out to everybody right away because it's a really great opportunity. And I think it was fairly underutilized this time around. So hopefully we'll see more people going after that funding this time.
Yep. Yep.
And you mentioned the local service offices, and I just put the nrcs.usda.gov website in the chat, and that's how you find your local office. So you should have an office that's either in your county or an adjacent county, and then you have a state office also. So the local person is who's going to help you with your conservation planning. And then if you have questions about whether or not there's a tribal set aside at the state level and those kinds of things, that's a question that you could direct towards the state office. And I'm happy to help you navigate and find the right people to get in touch with that as well.
Excellent.
Any other questions for Christy? You got a wealth of information. use your opportunity. Okay, we're shy today.
Third day of the symposium.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Christy, and thank you for dropping your contact info into the chat for folks to get in touch with you if they have follow-up questions. We really appreciate your time and joining us today.
Thank you, Leah, and thank you, everyone.
Okay, so Nicole, I believe that you're up. So we'll have a presentation from Nicole Kubitsky, who is an NRCS soil scientist and works with the Seneca Nation of Indians. Then we'll move down to Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians to hear from Desiree Kissel, who you heard of yesterday when we had EBCI on. And then we'll wrap up with talking about the SARE program, Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education. And then there will be time to do the survey and some discussion at the end. So hope you stay with us for the whole time. And Nicole, if you are ready, I believe you should be able to start. There you go.
And it looks like that's sharing my notes, is it?
No, we've got
Okay,
just the
great,
presentation.
awesome, perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, thanks, Christy, for kind of giving that higher level overview, especially with the cooperative agreements and some of those national funding opportunities. That's definitely outside of my scope as kind of one of those local people that Leah mentioned when she put that link in the chat to who to find to help you out. I want to say thank you to Leah and USET, as well as the rest of the presenters. I've learned so much over the past couple of days with you all, and it's very clear that there's so many exciting projects, diverse projects happening across Turtle Island, or at least within the USET region of Turtle Island. I wanted to mention that the original invitation was both for me and Mike Snyder, the agricultural director at Gakuyo Farms, to present. He was kind of had the foreshadowing to know that right now he would be in full-blown maple season, and that is the case. So the farm is currently, I chatted with him last night, and they're doing their first major maple boil today. So I did talk with Mike throughout the process of creating these slides, discussing what we wanted to cover, and hopefully trying to convey some of things from his perspective as well. Of course, that's an important piece. So with that, my name is Nicole Kavitsky. I'm a soil scientist in what we now call New York State, and serve as the Seneca Nation of Indians tribal point of contact for NRCS. Christy really did a great job kind of discussing these higher level things. If you haven't been to the website for the Office of Tribal Relations, here's a screenshot. It's very interactive, lots of exciting stuff coming out of National. I welcome you to check out their website. And I wanted to situate this conversation today with kind of a high level context first, and then drill down to some specifics of the relationship and program implementation with the Seneca Nation. So while the work I do on the local level isn't necessarily part of those higher level leadership expectations to fulfill trust, responsibility, consultation, that government to government relationship, it is critical as a NRCS point of contact working with an Indigenous nation that I am educated and trained and continue to learn about how these things are actualized, and particularly how they're actualized for the tribe I'm serving, in this case, the Seneca Nation. So I really wanted to situate that with this discussion. NRCS does have a training called Working Effectively with American Indians. It's a 4-day intensive training where lots of these things like tribal law consultation are discussed. On my day-to-day interactions, it's more of the self-determination and sovereignty that I really try to keep at the forefront when having discussions and planning with Gakuyo Farms and the Senecas. This just kind of illustrates the structure in New York State. Leah spoke to it as well as Christy. Here in New York, we have a set of staff that are dedicated and trained up to work directly with a particular federally recognized tribe. There's a diversity of folks that I talk to, engage with, in order to have NRCS fit into the relationship with the Seneca Nation. And what I mean by that is, obviously, you know, USDA would be working with their agriculture department, Gakuyo Farms, but there's so many other entities, whether it's departments, offices that we're working with, talking to, having meetings with. And I want to highlight that, you know, this didn't emerge, these relationships as me serving as the tribal point of contact didn't really emerge out of the thin air. I've only been in this position for 3 years, but something that is critical is my predecessor and mentor, John Whitney, some of you on the line may know him, spent 3 decades in the office, being the lead there and working with the Seneca Nation for that time. And prior to him retiring, he started to bring me into meetings. There was meetings with, Army Corps of Engineers and council chambers. I spoke at the Youth Food and Sovereignty Summit. And so it was really helpful for him having this long tenure, as we know, relationships. And eventually some level of trust takes a lot of time to establish with an Indigenous community, Indigenous nation. And so having that transition period was really helpful for NRCS to continue to have a relationship with Seneca. In addition to these relationships within the government itself, NRCS also partners with Cornell Cooperative Extension, American Farmland Trust, of course, IAC, and USET in order to deliver conservation technical assistance and other programming. In terms of relationships, of course, we have the programs, but I believe a really good starting point is really just sharing space and knowledge and learning from each other through these training opportunities. So this is a slide with the gardening series that was a joint effort between Guaquillo Farms as well as NRCS and Cornell. So the topics ranged from holistic farm planning, soil health, soil fertility, seed starting. Some of these trainings were both for farm staff, but community members were welcome to join. And it was a kind of a train the trainer format as well. That way farm staff could go out into the community and relay this information to their own community members. Another aspect of technical assistance was a tribal soil and climate analysis network weather station and installation that happened a few years ago. This is on territory at the farm. And these weather stations, some of them are throughout tribal lands through an application process. This was a 3-day installation, and it really helps the Seneca Nation to inform decisions both about emergency management in terms of flood control. They're at the end of a very large watershed on their Cattaraugus territory, but also helps inform their agricultural operations. So there's a suite of tools there, from temperature, wind speed, direction, lots of fancy stuff that I don't know. I'm not a meteorologist. But what we can infer from all of these data points is, when is a good time to irrigate? When would we expect emergent diseases, whether those be insect pests or fungal pressures? So really helpful tool. And I have to highlight the Plant Materials Center. They're scattered across the country, and we have one here in New York. And they've been critical in terms of really kind of assisting requests from Indigenous nations. So workshops have included an array. Oftentimes, these are workshops that are requested by a particular tribe. Also, on an annual basis, sweetgrass is propagated on site and shipped to the tribes. There's the propagules on the top image. The lower image is a stand of sweetgrass. It's a little plot that exists on the farm. And the last image was provided to us by Peace Chief of the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes of Oklahoma, Gordon Yellowman, who Suzanne Baker, our New York State Tribal Liaison, worked and was able to work with the Plant Material Center and send these sweetgrass propagules out. And his community was one of the recipients. So kind of laid the framework there in terms of what kind of transpires to start to build those relationships in terms of what's physically kind of happening. I'm going to get more to the cultural context, of course, to like close out. But I was asked to talk about NRCS programs. So when we mention programs, we're really talking about money. And there's different ways that that money is allocated through different programs. I'm just going to focus on kind of the history of what NRCS has done with the Seneca Nation. Our data goes back to 2001. Perhaps there was dollars allocated prior to that, but I'm not aware. Most of it, as Christy said, for Alaska is true here in New York. A lot of that money is allocated through the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. Some of these dollars that you see here in practices were under the Wildlife Habitat Incentives Program, WIP. It's no longer an active program, but many of the provisions within WIP were rolled over into EQIP with the Farm Bill. Some highlights included 6 high tunnel systems over this period, and total funds of what has been given out in addition to the one active contract is over $460,000. I have a list of all the practices that have been executed or contracted. These, and again, I did work with Mike to come up with these slides and have permission to share this information because it's certainly a protected and privileged information, but he was very adamant about this being a transparent presentation. So you'll see that some of the practices have to do with what we talked about yesterday. So ecological services and our wildlife forestry. Some are more agronomic with the nutrient management plans, irrigation work. I do want to say that this, I love this photo. This is their bear paw beans, and the pollinators, when these beans are in bloom, are they're just loaded with pollinators. You can hear them. Sometimes we have plans that don't fully manifest into a full-blown contract. So this was a herd of cattle the Seneca Nation got in 2020. Throughout the 2020 growing season, I went out with different members of their farm. We looked at the paddocks and designed a prescribed grazing plan, including fence, some stream crossing, watering systems. The Senecas decided they wanted to pursue work with their bison herd over working with the cattle. And so this never came to fruition as a full contract. But I wanted to talk about, in particular, the time frames. So something that we hear a lot is, NRCS has very specific time frames, and oftentimes our funding cycles are only on an annual basis. Sometimes we can have application processes that are rolling, but sometimes they're just once a year. So this project, which was all set to be contracted, really only took about a year from start to finish. The cattle showed up on the farm in 2020, and that's when we did the assessments. And so it was a pretty new for them to have possession, I guess, and management of this land. And it was all planned and ready to go by 2021. Whereas that's not always the case. I wanted to use a more complex example for a contract with irrigation. It started in December of 2017 with an application for an irrigation water management plan. And we have these plans, they're structured a little differently right now, but these plans can be a really nice way if you're a tribe that hasn't worked with NRCS before or USDA. These plans can be a really nice way to kind of get your feet wet with our processes and learn, how to move throughout this contract in, a way that makes sense for two governments. And so it started with a plan that was applied for in 2017. And then the plan was completed for the irrigation work. And then we went to an implementation contract that was funded in August of 2020. So that was about 2.5 years from when discussions first started on this irrigation work to when it was contracted. Now, these contracts can be short, they can be a year. This one is a 4-year contract. And I can say these things like numbers and high tunnels and dollars and practices, but in my mind, this image kind of says why we're here. So this is one of the NRCS funded high tunnels, and It is at the Faith Keepers Montessori Language Nest on the Allegheny Territory. And this is a space where there's a school and the youth are able to go out, get their hands in the soil. I suggest if you have free time and you want a mood booster, to go on their website and see these images of these Seneca youth in this garden space. And they promote and use their native tongue to be with these plant relatives, and it's really powerful. So high tunnels are much more than metal and plastic, as we all know. So I wanted to say, well, we've throughout the history of NRCS working with the Seneca Nation, there's been a lot of contracts executed and technical assistance, formal trainings that have been provided. There's a lot of conversations that happen. And some of those conversations are things that are in NRCS's shop, and some of the things aren't. We don't really get involved with things like chronic wasting disease that we've talked about, but APHIS with USDA does. And NRCS really doesn't touch food safety either. But, there's these topics that come up and emerge, and oftentimes NRCS can kind of be a conduit to make sure that Mike and his crew are getting in touch with the right folks. I've been told it can be a little overwhelming to have all these state and federal agencies, and you're not quite sure what they do and who they are, and you've never seen them, but maybe just in an email. And so it is really helpful when you have a relationship with a tribe to be able to serve as a conduit and not just say, oh, well, here's an email. So we really try to make that connection and in a more robust way than just an email. So very, very diverse things we're always talking about, but I liked this image as a metaphor because, these conversations are happening, but they're in the context of the petals radiating out from the Seneca sunflower. So it's in the context of, traditional ecological knowledge and indigenous stewardship methods. And lastly, I just wanted to talk about the cultural context. So one of the prompts given to me for this is, what advice would you give to a tribal point of contact person that's just getting started? I mean, I feel like I'm still getting started 3 years into it. I'm constantly learning. But one thing Mike shared that was critical is he said, the person that's working with us, they're able to tell whether or not you're really invested. So in essence, have you done the baseline education on your own to understand who they are as Haudenosaunee people, their history, why they do the things they do? Have you picked up books? Do you listen, ask questions? And we're constantly sharing personal stories with each other to bring out the human element in us. And I try to walk this path with a certain level of humility, because those of us that work in this space know that there are diverse ways of knowing. And what I learned as a soil scientist at Penn State, I mean, sure, it might be true, but there are other truths out there in terms of how we relate to the land. Another thing I'll leave with in terms of the cultural context is it's important to show up and not just in your 9 to 5. If there's maple, for instance, a maple celebration on territory, if it's open to the public, I try to go. My husband and I once went to a farmer's market with several members of the Seneca Nation staff on a Saturday. They brought their kids. We walked around and looked at the produce and talked about packing and handling of produce and showing up for other community events. There was a family member of someone from the farm who passed away, and I felt compelled, if it was appropriate, to show up at some of the services. And so I chatted with another farm member and made sure it was okay. I was educated and learned not to wear red, and showed up in order to, in my own way, pay respect to what this meant for their community. So a lot of it is just showing up with authenticity, but also being educated in those things, how we opened up, that this is a unique relationship that deserves a high level of respect and reverence. And I guess the thing that I'll close with is, I'm constantly learning throughout this process. And I often, while having these conversations, I call to mind the Gunonyok, the Thanksgiving address, and try to think of some of those words that have been shared with me by the Senecas when I show up. And so one thing that I like to keep in mind is, gathering our minds as one, and being of good heart and good mind when we're doing this work. And I think that really goes a long way. So thank you for giving me some space to share some words today, and I'll turn it over to Leah. I'll be on the line for the rest of the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicole. I really appreciated the amount of detail that Seneca Nation was willing to share. And thank you for providing such in-depth information about the programs that they're utilizing and how they're utilizing the programs. I think we often get a broad picture of what's available, and it's really nice to see the specifics. And I also really appreciated how much you shared about your personal experience, and I really think of you as somebody who gets it and really does want to be a great ally in Indian country. So thank you so much for sharing your insights on that too. If you have questions for Nicole, please put those in the chat or save them until the discussion at the end. Definitely utilize her as a resource, because she has really been helpful with Seneca Nation's conservation efforts. And their farm is relatively new. It's only been operating for maybe 5 years, and it's just incredible how they've been able to grab onto these programs and really use them for their agricultural goals and their conservation goals. So definitely chime in if you have questions, and reach out to her. So we're going to move on now to Desiree Kissel at Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. She is the Conservation Outreach Coordinator, and I'm sure she'll give you a lot of background on how that position got started and the agreement between EBCI and NRCS in North Carolina. So thank you, Desiree, for joining us.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. This is actually my first Zoom presentation, so hopefully I can figure out how to share my screen successfully. And so you guys don't see my notes. I might need you to walk me through this, actually.
There's a little green button at the bottom of the
There
Zoom.
it is. Okay. This is the one. Or is that my slideshow?
Nope, we've got the full screen.
Full screen. All right, awesome. Thank you so much. So yeah, I would like to talk about conservation and practice with my position here at the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians and our partnership with the NRCS. I am not an enrolled EBCI member. I am actually enrolled with the Muskogee Creek Nation in Oklahoma. I have been serving in this position since June. And in that, I actually had a baby. So I had to step away for a couple of months. So I'm still getting my feet underneath me. This, you can check back with me in another year. I could probably have a completely different viewpoint on this position. There we go. So what exactly is my position? I am the Conservation Outreach Coordinator here at Eastern Band of Cherokee. I will refer to it as EBCI. It's just a mouthful, so it's just easier for us to refer to us as EBCI. Currently, my duties are roughly 50-50. My position is almost 50% funded by the NRCS and the other half with EBCI. So first and foremost, my priorities lie with the EBCI Natural Resource Department and doing outreach. And so that could look like coordinating and presenting conservation education programs, doing educational activities with our local schools, teacher workshops, scheduling and arranging tours, putting together field days or fair displays, and hosting meetings for groups that are interested in our EBCI natural resource management. Our department here does have many moving pieces. We have air quality, we have fisheries and wildlife, we have our own hatchery here, we have a forestry sector, regulatory compliance, horticulture, which you heard about yesterday, a water quality lab, and watershed management. My second priority in my position is disseminating information for the USDA NRCS. And as we've heard earlier in some of these other presentations, the NRCS offers cost share programs, but there's much more than that. There's also technical assistance. And that could be in the form of developing land management plans, conservation plans, assisting producers in taking inventory of their resources, and planning maintenance schedules and things like that. For our tribe, sometimes we will apply for the NRCS funding, and so we'll be the name on the contract. And so that means that our department is in charge of implementing these practices and making sure they get done on time. One of the biggest things we want to do is increase individual tribal member participation in NRCS programs. And so that, it would not be in our name, and the tribal member would be responsible for implementing all the practices. But of course, we would always be here to facilitate or answer any questions that they might have. So my job expectations is first and foremost addressing the departmental needs, like I mentioned earlier, and then second is assisting landowners and producers with assistance. Not all producers are landowners, some of them are leasees. So just a brief history of the or the partnership that we have. I believe that this position or NRCS and EBCI relationship has been going back on into the 90s, but it was completely controlled by the NRCS. I believe that this person was called a tribal liaison, and they were offered story told that I've been filled in on is that this person would also often refer producers to the county office, and that the tribe didn't really have much of a hand or say in the day-to-day functions of this person or any oversight at all. It also seemed that the NRCS didn't require this person to have conservation planning background or to even be a certified planner. EBCI did feel that they would have better participation if they had control over this position. This position, or the tribal liaison position, went vacant in 2014, and where it remained vacant for quite a few years. And then in 2018, the EBCI Department of Natural Resources advocated to have control of the position. So that's kind of why it is formed into a 50-50 split between tribal needs and NRCS needs. I'm actually the second person to be in this position. And I'm still getting my feet underneath me. As I said, I took some maternity leave here. My first job out of grad school in 2020, right before the pandemic hit, I was actually a soil conservationist for the NRCS in Indio, California. I started a month before the pandemic, and so I found it really hard to get my feet underneath me at the NRCS and my job expectations. I did enjoy it. However, I felt there was a component missing, and that would be the cultural component. And so when I saw this position come open, it really moved me, and I really decided that this was the best for me. So I actually moved from California to take this position. So currently, we have a few projects going. We have one active contract, but that active contract is on 4 different possessory landholder tracts. And so some of the practices that we're doing on those include invasive plant management. So that would be brush management, herbaceous weed treatment, forest stand improvement, prescribed burning, and fire breaks. So not these properties don't all have the same goal in mind. So some of these properties, we are helping to prepare these trees for timber harvest so that the possessory landholder can get a little bit of income. One of these locations, actually, our property's goal is to restore the oak community, and that the purpose in that is to provide materials for our tribal artisans. And then, while at the same time, our goal is to utilize this opportunity for data collection, and the data collection is to support our argument for TEK and to show that Indigenous communities do know what's best for their landscape, and that maybe we should have a little more control or a little more say in what goes on. A lot of us know that prescribed burning was an active land management practice that's kind of gone out of use, and that's mainly because of Indigenous communities no longer having control of their lands. So this also provides opportunities for several facets of our department to work together. For example, our forestry department, he is jointly working with the Forest Service, and so we're doing a prescribed burns, and we're bringing in our air quality department to monitor that too, so we can have data on the different levels of chemicals that might be present based on the treatments that we put out, the chemical treatments that we put out. This also provides us a good time to bring in the community. And so we've had elders come out to some of these locations to give us input and to educate us on the optimal plant materials for their needs, like baskets. And so we've been learning a lot about plant communities and how presence of one or absence of another really affects the quality of, let's say, white oak. And it's just been very interesting to have that perspective and to be able to give that back to the community. And, you know, it doesn't happen overnight, unfortunately. But, you know, hopefully we are preparing our next generation to have access to these traditional resources. We do have one deferred contract. Unfortunately, this position kind of sat open for a little while. It took me actually several months after accepting the job position, to move out here due to the lack of affordable housing or even housing in general. So without having somebody in the position, we had to defer a contract for our chemical handling facilities, and that is for the greenhouse facility that David talked about yesterday, as well as our seed bank facility at the motherland in Gadua. And so hopefully that will be picked back up and we can get that going for the next fiscal year. So Leah provided us with some general questions on kind of what our experience is and what I've learned. And so I've kind of taken some of those and modified some of those as well. So as far as relationships go, what have I learned about building relationships in tribal nations? One big thing is when you meet these tribal members, it is always best to go with someone who has a good reputation in the community, or, you know, another tribal member, because people, they don't know you, right? And so you may get some pushback on that. And what's interesting is I actually have a lot of family here, and we've been here for generations, but we're not tribal members. And so just because my family's here, you know, they might have a good name, but they don't know me. And I made the mistake of going to meet somebody on my own thinking that it would go well. And I wouldn't say it didn't go well, but there was a little pushback of like, who are you? Like, you know, what are your ties to this community? And, you know, just to be mindful that this is a very small community, and most tribal nations are like that. You know, everyone knows everyone. So just listening as well to what their needs are. And sometimes I think when some of us come from academia, we think we're the experts, and in a way we might be, but at the same time we're not. We're really not. I have also heard of a not favorable perception of the NRCS here, and that could be for reasons of the programs that NRCS offer were not developed with tribal communities in mind. You know, thinking TEK or the actual implementation of these programs doesn't always align with how tribal members actually do their farming. And that could be because of limited land availability, being limited on the reservation. You know, farmers are working with what they have. Another issue that I don't want to say it's an issue, another perspective that I wasn't aware of until I started this position is that many of these farmers are just growing for themselves and for their community. They're not really looking to make a profit. And so when you think of terms of NRCS funding, you do get a 1099 at the end of the year. And so that's just another tax bill for, you know, this farmer who's really only producing enough to maybe can or give away, or, you know, just because that's what they've always done. They've always grown and they have a connection to growing. So some of them aren't really interested or even really motivated in making a profit. But another thing is a lot of people don't realize that you're going to get a 1099. So I think maybe some educational, more educational outreach needs to be done on that, and maybe even setting up or pointing out services that could help these tribal members understand how this, the implications of getting a 1099 will affect them. Because, you know, I think some people get a fear of this tax bill, and they don't have to be fearful. It's just, it's a lack of understanding. So as far as timelines go, like I said, I am new to the position, so I haven't brought a new contract on and taken it to completion. I am actually just been working on contracts that were already established before I got here, but we have been doing site visits and getting payments out on there. I've been learning a lot about forest management. That is not my background, so it's very very nice to be able to diversify my my experience. I think someone mentioned this earlier. EQIP is an annual deadline, so, you know, I could go out and meet with a farmer today and decide that we want to put a high tunnel in. However, I'm not going to be able to submit an application for funding to even be considered until maybe October or November. And so we could be here next year not knowing, or just finding out we got a contract. So it could take a really long time to implement some of these projects. So, you know, I do find that to be limiting. I do try to tell people, let's just get your application in as soon as possible, because every now and then the state does allocate extra money. So, you know, if your application's in there, you have the opportunity to get that funding. Of course, as we've mentioned or we've heard throughout this whole conference, is there's a lot of challenges due to COVID. From my experience so far, it seems like there's a little bit of NRCS turnover. There's people going on leave for COVID reasons. For example, I got this position in June, and I just received my federal ID last week. Now, there might be some issues due to that, because I did used to have a federal ID. And so I think some of my emails that were supposed to be coming to my tribal email address were going to my USDA email address that was still active. So it's been a little bit challenging in that regard, because I'm ready to get back in there and to utilize all the resources that the NRCS does provide. They do have, you know, the staff to write up a lot of, you know, a lot of, how do I say it? And about how to pretty much how to do conservation planning. And so since I was removed from NRCS for almost a year before taking this position, a lot of this stuff kind of went to the back of my mind. I actually didn't ever think I would work back for the NRCS. So I'm really excited to actually get a computer, which I don't know when I'm getting a computer. That's another issue. The person who was supposed to be working on that is on leave, and they've been on leave for a while due to COVID. And of course, that leads me into navigating the federal government as a whole. Nothing happens overnight with the federal government. The government kind of works on its own timeline. And due to that, the NRCS staff that we do have here is stretched pretty thin, trying to cover these gaps in coverage due to maybe COVID or people actually leaving the agency. So it's been really hard to get like one-on-one training with my point of contact here. So what advice do I have to give a tribal point of contact who's just getting started? As I mentioned, nothing happens quickly in the federal government. And one of my main points would be like, don't give up. You're going to need to advocate for your people. A lot of employees who work for the NRCS have never dealt with tribal affairs at all. And so you may ask them a question that you already know the answer to, or like have like a vague idea, and they'll just be like, oh, no. But it's really just a lack of education on their part because they've never had to interact with any tribal nations or tribal members before. I would recommend doing a lot of research before you go into an NRCS for that reason. The NRCS does make a lot of things available on their website as far as policy goes. It is policy, so it's hard to get through. So just, take your time getting through it, but learning the language is really important. An understanding on how the NRCS is going to, what their expectations of you are. Partnerships are very, very important, especially with extension and nonprofits, because, a lot of people go to NRCS just for federal funding. And when they hear there's a 1099, they get a little discouraged or intimidated. So that's where I think extension and nonprofits can come in and maybe find grant money for those who are interested in going down that route. I would also utilize social media and your connections as much as you can. So hopefully you have a network that you've established, because some of us are just doing this for the first time, or some of us have reached out to our offices and gotten nowhere, but we know we could get somewhere. For example, we've been asking for money for river cane, and we keep being told that there's nothing like that available here in North Carolina. But as we heard yesterday, the Catawba Nation has received NRCS funding for some river cane. And so that's where I'm going to go and reach out to Marvin and ask him, what funding pool did they go under? What practices are they utilizing? And that's just only going to strengthen our relationship and what I can offer to our tribal nation here. With that being said, please, anyone reach out to me if you think there's anything I can help you with, or even if I can't, building that connection will be awesome. So we could work later down the line, even if I can't help you now. I would also recommend being very organized. One of the issues that we've encountered here is that we don't really have a very good database of all our tribal members who are producers. So there's kind of like a list here and a list there. And so I've been really trying to pull all that together and making one organized spreadsheet with contact information, and that, maybe even putting what crops they're producing or what type of, if they have livestock, and just when you talk to them, I would personally go in and I make my own like Word document for each farmer, and I just jot down as much as I can. I ask them as much as I can while I have them on the phone or in person, because that's really only just going to help you later on. Sometimes we get really busy with all the stuff that we're doing, and you can't always remember the conversation that you had 6 months ago. So that would be probably my biggest thing. Keep track and make notes of all your meetings, and to document what these farmers want and what they need. So if you hear of, maybe some special funding for something that the NRCS doesn't normally provide funding for, then you can say, oh, I need to call, Mr. So-and-so down the road, let him know that there's an opportunity for him. But other than that, I'm really excited to keep working in this position. I haven't been able to do a lot of NRCS stuff, as I mentioned, but there's a lot of opportunity, and I'm just really thankful that this position came available for me. I think it suits me very well. I've always wanted to go into a field that had some kind of significance or meaning for me. And I found that lacking at the NRCS when I worked in Indio. I just didn't really have ties to the community as well. And so that made it really a little bit difficult for me to see the bigger picture. The department here outside of NRCS, we have a variety of projects going on that I could really just do a whole separate presentation on, that are really exciting. And I think it can set the example for other tribal communities to advocate for themselves for control of their homelands. Um, so with that, that's all I have for today. But as I mentioned, please reach out to me if there's anything I can help you with, even if it's just a conversation. We have a Facebook that I'm working on. Our social media game is a little lacking, so I could use some pointers in that as well. With that, I thank you so much for your time, and thank you.
Leah, you're muted.
Leah, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Thanks, Desiree. I really appreciate your candor in your presentation and talking about the barriers as well as the successes, because it's really important for those to get out in the open, especially in a forum like this where we're all working towards the same goal of improving that relationship and that easy flow of communication and work between tribal nations and federal agencies at the state and local level as well. So thank you so much for that. There are a couple of things that I would like to touch on just based on what Desiree presented on. And I saw your question, Rue, about talking about how other tribes could develop that program. So since we have a little bit of time before the SARE program starts, I just want to touch on that really quickly. So Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians and NRCS North Carolina have a cooperative agreement to do a cost share on her position. So it's partially funded by the tribe, partially funded by NRCS, and then the position is housed within the tribe, which is an important distinction. So the tribe determines the hiring process and all of that kind of stuff, and they follow the tribal HR policies. She's on site at the tribal nation and not at the NRCS. So it's a really great way to it's a really great way to integrate NRCS programs and do outreach within the community instead of relying on an NRCS tribal point of contact. So it's really two different styles of doing outreach. So you have in New York tribal points of contact assigned to each tribal nation that are NRCS employees that are really doing a lot of the work that Desiree is doing, but then also doing the rest of their NRCS appointment work. And then in North Carolina, you have the relationship that EBCI and NRCS have developed where they have a tribal employee that does the outreach to tribal citizens. So I think that's a whole other presentation in itself on how to go about working on a cooperative agreement or a cost share agreement like the one that they have at EBCI. And I would be happy to set that up as a follow-up because I think it is a really good model, especially for states that have one tribal nation with active farmers within the tribal citizenry. So I really appreciate you sharing that, Desiree, and kind of getting the word out. I know that the program has kind of been up and down with its relationship between NRCS and EBCI on this issue, and I think it's really great that you're in that position and starting to get the ball rolling. And thank you for coming up here and presenting, even though you've only been on the job for a few months, especially with your little one that you welcomed. So congratulations on that, and congratulations on your position at EBCI. There's a couple other things that I wanted to mention that are associated to that. So issues like the tax form being a barrier, issues like the lag in the timeline being a barrier for access to the EQIP program, those are really good examples of issues that can be raised to the state technical committee for your NRCS office. So Desiree, are you on the state technical advisory committee, or is there a technical advisory committee position for a tribal representative?
Yes, I currently am a part of those conversations. I'm new, so I'm listening. They usually have a goal in mind. So last time it was easements and forestry. They are kind of lengthy and sometimes they move faster than you think they're going to move. So, but I am starting to participate a little bit more. And so hopefully people will know who I am soon.
Yeah.
But yes, I am on there, and I'm always looking for other committees to be on that can assist us in that way.
And that's great. And so if your tribal nation is not currently participating in your state's technical advisory committee, or sometimes they'll even have a tribal subcommittee, or in New York, there's a tribal conservation advisory council that got started just last year that serves that purpose, is providing that feedback to NRCS on what is working and what is not working, so that language can be moved around or policy recommendations can be made from the local level and up to make those kinds of changes to ease that friction in utilization of the programs. And another good opportunity to get the word out on what those conflicts or friction points might be is the Native Farm Bill Coalition. So if your tribal nation is not active in the Native Farm Bill Coalition, that would be another one to look into, and I'll pop the address right in the chat there. It's nativefarmbill.com. This is a coalition that got started at the planning part of the last Farm Bill. It has a lot of very active tribal participation to get feedback into the recommendations, the policy recommendations that are made to the next Farm Bill that's going to be coming up in 2023, hopefully, if everything goes to plan. So participating in that and raising your voice in that can be a really great way to make those policy recommendations that can change at a national level and then affect everybody across Indian country. So don't be afraid to raise your voice and participate in those channels, because it's incremental change, but there is change happening through that. And so with the last Farm Bill, we saw more tribal programs, tribes mentioned in the program, language as eligible entities than ever before. So it is making a big difference, and I highly recommend participating in that, either as an individual tribal producer or recommending that your tribal nation join the coalition. So that's all I'll say about that right now. I did make a note about the 1099 situation, and I think I probably got us back on track with time now that I've chatted a whole bunch. But does anybody else have a last minute question for Desiree before we move into SARE? I don't want to hog the screen here. Okay, all right, we'll go into the SARE presentation, and then we will circle back and we'll have discussion time. So I'm gonna kick this off actually. Okay, so SARE, I keep saying SARE. If you're not familiar with that acronym, it's Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education. It's a national program that's broken up into regional pieces. And before we dove into all of the program language, and before you meet the SARE staff, some of the SARE staff that are on today, I just wanted to give you a little bit of background and a little bit of food for thought on how these programs could be utilized. And I'm going to take you back in time to Tuesday when we were talking about Ohelagu, because our co-op actually got started with the SARE grant. We went after a farmer rancher grant in 2015, and that helped us do on-farm research. And then we went after another one just last year. And then last year also through USET, I applied to the professional development program and got a grant to do outreach in the USET region. So I'm going to take you through those projects just so you have an idea of how you can apply these programs. And then I'll hand it over to the SARE staff, and they'll give you more information on all of the programs that are available that are applicable. And it's going to be little sound bites, so you're not going to get a lot of detail, but it'll give you a taste of what's available there. And it's a pretty underutilized agency, so I highly recommend looking up your regional SARE contact, and you'll get a chance to meet them today too. So the first farmer rancher grant we got was on using fish emulsion as a traditional fertilizer. And this was something that, we got a little bit of money to buy a fish emulsion sprayer tank, some fish emulsion, and then do a little bit of research with our white corn to see how that fish emulsion impacted our yields. And this was important for us because fish used to be buried in the mound system with the corn, beans, and squash. And so now that we're growing kind of just a big field of corn, we wanted to know, can we spray fish emulsion on top and will it have a similar effect? And we found a really positive outcome with the fish emulsion. One of the big takeaways was this quote that we had at the end of the evaluation of that project, that one of the Ohelagu members said, "I want to use the corn year round. I love the fellowship and positive way we work together. Learning about the corn was not work for me. I lost track of time. It takes a village to grow a field. So this little grant was what seeded that whole co-op to get started. And since then we've grown 20,000 pounds of corn together. So sometimes it just takes that little bit of money to get you started. And this program was really great because it had a really low administrative burden. They actually helped us put together our application. We had a lot of questions. The staff were extremely helpful. And even when we were writing it, they would kind of give us feedback on, what would be applicable for the program and not. So I highly recommend getting in touch and trying to utilize these programs. I know it's not called Farmer Rancher in the Northeast and the Southern region, but you'll hear more about that from the SARE folks. And I'm happy to share the links for these projects because they have a database on their SARE.org webpage. All of the projects they've ever funded in sustainable agriculture are on there, which is a wealth of information. So if you're thinking about designing a project, I highly recommend going on there, seeing what else has been done, and then coming up with a little twist or a new idea and going after one of these grants yourself. Our second grant that we're working on right now is just doing cover crops and no-till production with our corn. So we divided up our field into sections, and we do cover crops on all of these other 5 fields. And then in field 2 this year, we're going to crimper roll our rustic rye down and drill the corn seed right into the ground without disturbing the soil at all. So that's a no-till system. In the red section, we're going to do plant the corn, and then once that comes up, interseed cover crops in between the rows. And then the blue section is going to be just regular standard cultivation. And we're going to be looking at how does that affect soil fertility? How does that affect our ratio between seed quality seeds and soup quality seeds? And we're going to be looking at the labor that it takes to do these 3 different modalities. So we have about an acre of roller crimper, a 1/4 acre of the interseeded, and then a 1/4 acre of the traditional cultivation. All right, this is the professional development program. This is the biggie. We got this at USET last year. The title of it is Growing Tribal Farming Capacity and Outreach. We're partnering with the tribes listed here, as well as Cornell Extension and Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association. The professional development program is really aimed at training ag service providers to provide better services to farmers. So we had to massage this program a little bit to fit, but it actually had some good change at SARE that Nevin will tell you about. So we, instead of agriculture service providers, which is typically like Extension or typically like a nonprofit, those folks are the tribal staff at the Tribal Nation farms listed here, or at the programs listed here at the Boys and Girls Club. And then the farmers are the community members. So not your typical conventional farmer, but people who are really subsistence farming or subsistence gardening. And we had to explain that a little bit and massage it a little bit, but they really worked with us to get there and get a yes, which was really great. So we're going to be co-developing a curriculum with traditional ecological knowledge and extension materials on sustainable ag topics that were chosen by the communities. Then we'll do a train-the-trainer for Tribal Nation Farm staff, and then we'll support the Tribal Nation Farm staff in delivering those topics to the communities. So this will be happening over the next 2 years, and if you have more questions about this, I'm happy to talk about that. But I'm going to hand it off to SARE folks so you can meet who are these amazing people that have this amazing program that is underutilized in the region.
Thank you. It's so great to be here. My name is Nevin Dawson. I live in Maryland, but I work for the Northeast SARE. I'm a member of their staff, and I help to run our professional development program, which you'll hear a little more about in just a minute. It's just one of our programs, and that happens to be the program that the project Leah described is under. So I want to just point out our tagline on this slide: farmer-driven innovations in agriculture that improve profitability, stewardship, and quality of life. So the profitability, stewardship, and quality of life, those are the traditional 3 legs of the sustainability stool. And we do interpret that broadly. So there are not too many topics, I don't think, that don't have some aspect of sustainability in them. We ideally might see a project fall into 2 of those 3 categories, but I just say that to encourage folks to think broadly about sustainability. And I know income is often not a focus of tribal agriculture, but that's often the focus of our projects as well. So it's important to know that we are a very regionalized program. We are funded by the USDA, but that money comes to a host institution in each region, each of 4 regions. You can see the map there. I think when you combine Northeast and Southern, it may line up exactly with USET. And there's a national office as well, but most of the regions have kind of a set of grant programs that are similar or parallel. And then each region kind of has its own spin-offs as well. So we'll try to point those out as we go along. One nice thing about our grant programs across the board is that we do not require matching funds. So there are other grant programs out there that basically only will fund half of your project, and it's up to you to find and prove that you have the funding for that other half before you can get that funding. We do not do that. Unfortunately, we do not provide funding for capital expenses or startup expenses. So it's not part of our mission to fund beginning farms just to get them up and off the ground, nor is it part of our mission to help people build a new barn or buy new stock of some kind. What we do is help farmers and researchers and educators try new ideas, see if they work, and that could be in the form of research and or education. So that's really what we excel at. And I think with that, I'll start talking a little more in depth about our individual programs. I'm just going to talk about one at Northeast SARE that is different from what Southern SARE has, and that's our graduate student program. And just like it sounds, that's for currently enrolled graduate students who can apply for up to $15,000 to help them with the research they're doing as part of their degree program. So those are on the kind of medium project length side, 2 years, and they work closely with their faculty advisor who serves as the principal investigator. So if any of you are in that role or know folks that are, I encourage you to send them our way if they're in the Northeast region. So next, I'm going to turn it over to David, and he's going to talk broadly about those programs that are similar or parallel across the Northeast and Southern regions, and a few that are unique to the Southern region.
Okay. Nevin, are you advancing? Okay. My name is David Redage. I work for the Kerr Center, a 501c3 nonprofit located in eastern Oklahoma in Poto. That's near Fort Smith, Arkansas, if that's better geographically. I manage, as I said, I manage the PDP program, but I'm on the staff at Southern SARE, and I want to talk a little bit about the research and education. That's our big grant program in both regions, Northeast and Southern. You can see the funding cap on each of the programs. One difference in the Southern region, we have broken out the education part, have a separate set of funds just for educational projects. That came out of a recognition several years ago, trying to fund education with NGOs. We recognized that NGOs specialize more in direct farmer training, and under PDP, that's not allowed. So we developed a separate program so that NGOs and some institutions can apply for funding to do direct farmer education. The research program is 3 years. Northeast, it's 2 to 3 years. The education program is 2 years. Pre-proposals, there's a slight calendar difference between the two regions. We released the pre-proposals in March. It's June in the Northeast. Ours are due in June, and you can see August in the Northeast, but the pre-proposals are all selected in August. The invitations go out for full proposals. They're due November, October, respectively. They're awarded at what we call our Winter Administrative Council meeting, and that's another aspect of SARE. There is an administrative council set up of representatives from within the region. It's usually federal government agencies, state agencies, and farmers. We really emphasize having farmers and NGO members as part of our administrative council to vote on who gets the funding. And then some of the special notes, in our Southern region proposals, we have to have farmers involved in those on the research and education projects. Northeast must have research optional, but must have education as part of it built in. Did I miss anything on that, Nevin?
Yeah, we do have another separate grant program specifically for research that is a little too cutting edge to be able to build an education program now, and that's called Research for Novel Approaches. And in most of the other ways, it's similar to research and education.
Okay. Next slide. PDP, professional development, that's what I manage. And that's train the trainer for ag service providers. Leah explained that quite well earlier. I thought you did a really good job. Extension NRCS, FSA, state departments of ag, nonprofits, NGOs are all appropriate audiences for these fundings. We say a funding cap in the South of 80,000. It can be more than that if you justify it. Northeast is higher at 150. Project length, the Southern region, 1 to 2 years, 2 to 3 years in the Northeast. The framework for the Southern region is a little shorter, and the same way for the Northeast region. We release our pre-proposal in July, June in the Northeast. They're both due in August. Our summer meeting is where it's decided at that point, and the AC reviews and selects who to invite back. Then the pre-proposals are invited back in October, are invited to submit full proposals. They're due in November and October. I don't know about the Northeast region. Evan, you can talk about this. In the Southern region, at this point, we have a technical review committee that is not as AC members that review our full proposals first, tell us if they are technically sound educational projects. The same thing holds true on our R&E, I forgot to mention that. Once their review is done, then our subcommittee of our administrative council reviews them, and then the administrative council votes on who to fund. Do you have the same setup in the Northeast, Nevin?
It's similar. Our AC members are wrapped into our technical committee, so there's a mix of folks that review at every stage.
And the takeaway on this is that each of our regions handles this as it fits best in our regions. So that's why USDA saw fit to break us up into regional programs. And when the SARE program was first funded, that was part of the authorizing language to divide it up into regions. Next slide, Nevin. Okay, state training funds. This is something both regions have. It's train the trainer, but we have every land grant has a SARE coordinator, a state coordinator housed at their institution. They're usually staff. Somehow it's decided on by their extension provider or extension director selects and recommends somebody. In the Southern region, we have 1862 land grants and 1890 land grants plus Tuskegee. We also have Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. We're in the Southern region, they have $30,000 to hire a program assistant in the state, and then $20,000 for training funds. These are used to, and then they have an advisory committee that meets to decide on what type of trainings are needed in each individual state. The Northeast, they have gone to receive $141,000 over 3 years to conduct SARE outreach on grant programs. And those state coordinators also serve as local contacts for farmers and service providers, which is also, and Evan's put a little arrow there. If you go to the website, you'll see, and you go to each region, you'll type on SARE in your state, and you can click on your state to say who your state coordinator is if you want to get in contact with them. In the Southern region, we have a slightly different program. The Northeast doesn't have one like this. We have travel scholarships, and those are expiring funds that have either been returned to SARE because they weren't fully used. So we manage those travel scholarships. It varies from year to year depending on how many expiring grant funds are available. We manage it through our state coordinators. If the requests are under $3,000, I can directly approve them as the PDP coordinator. If it goes $3,000 and up, I have to take it before our executive committee or full AC for approval. Mentor farmer travel is allowed in this, but they still must meet the trainer model. So ideas on how to utilize these funds, if there's a project or workshop going on somewhere, Applications for travel scholarship can be made to attend that training or workshop or conference. Also, speakers can be brought in or trainers to come to a location to develop and put together a training where multiple farmers can attend to receive training. I'm turning it over to Brandon Washington.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having us today. My name is Brennan Washington. I am the 1890 Land Grant Liaison and Southeastern Outreach Coordinator for Southern SARE, based at Fort Valley State University, and I'm located in Lawrenceville, Georgia. We have two grants, our on-farm research grants in the South and our partnership grants in the Northeast are for cooperative extension, NRCS, nonprofits, and other ag professionals who work directly with farmers. It's to do some directed research on a particular farmer's farm. It's a good stepping stone into larger grant programs, and it's ideal for new and young researchers. It encourages collaborations between farmers. In fact, we always like to see that collaboration between farmers within the SARE program. It's a good introduction to the SARE program, and it helps to build a research portfolio. In the South, our funding cap is $20,000, in the Northeast, $30,000, with a project length of 2 years in the South and 1 to 3 years in the Northeast. We accept our proposals in September, and it looks like the Northeast, this program is now open in the Northeast, and grants are typically awarded in February for the Southern region and in August for the Northeast. And if I miss anything, Nevin, on the Northeast that you want to add, please do.
Just that you're about to hear about the farmer grants, farmer producer grants. And this program Brendan just talked about is very similar. It's just the relationship is flipped. The farmer grants require a farmer to work with a technical advisor. The partnership or on-farm research grants require the technical advisor, someone in that sort of role, to work with the farmer. So it's just kind of depends who is applying and running the project.
Okay, now we have our producer grants, which we call them in the Southern region, and our farmer grants, which they're called in the Northeast. And these provide funds to conduct on-farm production or marketing research projects. And as Nevin just stated, the difference between this and the grants we just talked about is that the farmers actually conducting the research on their farm. It's open to individual farmers and farmer groups, and it's designed to allow farmers to conduct on-farm research to test sustainable ag ideas. I got involved with the SARE program about 12 years ago when I was able to write a grant, had never written a grant before, and got a grant to study growing European melons in the South. And that's how I got involved with the SARE program. It's a very flexible program. The funding cap in the Southern region is $15,000 for an individual, or $20,000 if two or more farmers are going in on the project together. It's $30,000 in the Northeast. Project length is 2 years in the Southern region or 1 to 3 years in the Northeast. Our proposals were accepted in September, and the Northeast accepts their proposals in November, and the grants awarded in February and March, respectively. Okay, we have in the Southern region, I'm not sure if the Northeast has it. We provide, the same way David had mentioned, we have travel scholarship. We provide sponsorship to help put on workshops, conferences, field days, and other educational events that advance the cause of sustainable agriculture. This is not a grant program. As David said, this is just de-obligated funds that we're trying to use up. And to be considered, it has to pertain to an event in the Southern region. It has to serve farmers or audiences who serve farmers. It has to include an outreach component, and it has to relate to sustainable agriculture. So an example of this, I'm actually getting ready to go to the South Carolina Black Farmers Conference on St. Helena's Island tomorrow. And that is an event we help put together some sponsorship funding for. So this is a good way for, if you're not even ready for grants, for you to be able to fund educational events on your farm. And the funding levels, I can approve anything 3,000 and under, and above that, it has to go to our administrative council. And in the South, we started a program called the Sustainable Ag Leadership Program, and it champions leadership contributions of historically underserved audiences. Participants receive sponsorship support of up to $3,000 to conduct education and training activities in any area of sustainable ag. In order to be eligible, it has to be historically underserved farmers and ranchers in leadership positions in the community. So we ask what type of work you've done. It has to be farmer groups. It can be a farmer group that has demonstrated leadership contributions, or it can be a nonprofit or other community group who serve those audiences. And the funding supports educational training activities that must pertain to sustainable agriculture and can be in person or online. The young lady holding the melon there is Miss Alicia from Alabama A&M, and her leadership project was just introducing and working with underserved farmers on business practices. So we are just wrapping up the selection of our final cohort. This will be our third cohort. It's a program we hope to continue into the future.
Yeah, thanks so much, Brennan.
Thank you.
So I'd like to just take a couple of minutes to talk about where we are in the Northeast. Because we are so regionalized, each region is kind of in a different place in terms of reaching historically underserved audiences or marginalized or oppressed audiences and communities. So in the Northeast, we have been talking a lot about it. And in the past year, especially, we've hired on a consultant group for a 3-year contract, and we're just wrapping up the first year of that, which was mostly planning. But one thing that we have done, and as Leah mentioned, her proposal helped us to kind of crystallize this question. We often have to answer the question, what is a farm? And because we only fund work that benefits farms. So we used to just go by the USDA definition, any place from which $1,000 or more of agricultural products were produced and sold, or normally would have been sold during the year. But through Leah and others, we realized that that often doesn't apply to tribal agricultural operations, because folks are not always interested in selling the things that they grow. So we, in the past year, modified our definition of a farm, and it now includes what's on the right: indigenous agriculture that produces products for community food systems. These enterprises may be eligible to apply, where the production activity has an annual value of more than $1,000. The products are not sold due to cultural factors. So we are, that's one concrete change we've already made. But in that year of planning I just mentioned, we just last week brought to our administrative council a proposed strategic plan specific to diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. And it's an 8-page document. There's a lot of content in there, but I thought I'd just briefly cover some of the things we're really excited about. So what's on the slide here are things that we are going to explore and we think we can implement. We're not sure exactly how yet. We know why and what, but we're not sure how. But I guess the first thing is acknowledging the role of Northeast SARE and its partners in perpetuating racism through systemic systems. And most of SARE and many of our partners and grantees are embedded in the land grant system of universities. And that, the way that was developed was unfortunate in many ways, but we're doing what we can with the system we're working within, and using that privilege and power to hopefully help more communities and more diverse communities So some of the things we're exploring are alternatives to written grant proposals, possibly even spoken word. Right now, all of our grants are funded in the Northeast region, at least, on a reimbursement basis. So grantees have to have the cash in their pocket to buy the stuff, to pay for the stuff first, and then get paid back for it, which is sometimes a barrier. And we're also working on the ways in which we value diverse ways of knowing, alternatives to the scientific method, which of course was developed long after tribal ways of knowing. And a kind of central part to our work will be building new partnerships with BIPOC-led organizations, which of course is Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and increasing BIPOC representation across our organization, within our staff, in our administrative council, in our technical committee, but specific to tribal communities. We're looking to establish a tribal advisory committee and dedicated tribal seats on our governance body, the administrative council, and adding tribal coordinators to our state coordinator program. And we're also exploring the establishment of a new grant program that would address and respond to the needs of BIPOC communities. So we're all very excited about this work, excited and just kind of in all of the amount of work it's going to take, but I think our excitement for it is more than enough to power us through the next 2 years of trying to stand up these new ways of doing things. And I know it's easy to talk the talk, but I think we're all pretty confident we can start at least taking baby steps and walking the walk. Here are 3 projects in the Northeast region. So there's Leah, and you may recognize other folks. Just as examples of what we have funded, we have a new one just starting now. It's not really public yet, but it's not led by a tribal member, but there is involvement by members of the tribal community. So it's very exciting as well. And I wanted to end just by sharing a few ways in which you can participate. So you've heard us talk a lot about reviewing and committees, technical committees, administrative councils. Well, those are made up of people, probably like yourself, who are involved in agriculture in a lot of different ways. And our technical committee is a great way to get started. It's open to anyone. You just have to submit your interest and a little bit about yourself. I don't think there are too many folks we have to turn down. But this is a large pool. It's more than 100 folks that, again, this is all in the Northeast, that we draw upon every time we need folks to review grant proposals. And there's probably no single better way to become a better grant writer than to review other people's grant proposals. You can really see where the common strengths are and where the common weaknesses are, and then apply those to your own writing. So that's as simple as starting a conversation by sending an email to northeastsare@uvm.edu. You'll end up communicating with my lovely colleague, Heather Oman, our associate director, and who runs that side of things. And she'll walk you through those steps. Our administrative councils, each region has one. That's our governance body for each region. Either David or Brennan mentioned, there are a lot of legislated seats, but there are also some at-large seats, some farmer seats. And as I mentioned, we're working to develop dedicated tribal seats. And most people on that council started out on our technical committee, but occasionally, in some cases, they don't. So that's something you're interested in. You can, in the Northeast region, contact that same email address. And of course, apply for grant funding. Compared to other grant programs, we have a very high acceptance rate, especially for the smaller grant programs, meaning those that are up to $15,000 or $30,000. The acceptance rate ranges in the Northeast from 40 to sometimes even 60%. when in a lot of other grant programs, it's closer to 10%. So the farmer grant, especially the application for that is designed to be accessible. You definitely do not need to have a PhD to successfully submit one of those proposals. It's more about whether it's a solid idea and methods are there to learn something new. And that's all I wanted to cover today. So thank you so much to everyone for being with us and learning about our programs. And we'll be happy to answer any questions. I think there's some time for discussion once Leah.
Evan, I wanted
shares
to
some other
jump in.
things. Yeah.
I wanted to jump in real quick. The Southern region also has a graduate student program, and the call's open right now. On our grants, we do fund on a reimbursement basis, just like Nevin mentioned, that can present some barriers. And when he talked about reviewing grants, that's the same thing in the South. If you want to serve as a grant reviewer, you can contact myself or anyone on the SARE staff or a state coordinator and ask them to pass the word on if you'd be interested in serving as a grant reviewer. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. That was a lot of information, I know, and right at the end of the event too, but I hope that you all got something out of it. And I hope that you saw those programs. And even though tribes may not have been listed as the common audiences that go after that programs, that doesn't mean that you're ineligible. So the first step is just reaching out and having a conversation, maybe looking through the database to see if there have been tribes accessing these programs in other regions that you could point to. And I'm happy to help you with that. I love working with the SARE folks and the SARE programs. Like I said, they're some of the easiest grants to write and to report on. It's a very simple, straightforward process. There's not a lot of tricky forms like you'll get with a lot of the other federal programs. It's just a nice online portal, and folks are really there to help you out. So the time has come for open discussion and for the evaluation. I think I'm going to pop the evaluation link into the chat so you can go ahead and start on that. It should be pretty quick. And in the meantime, we can have some discussion. Does anybody have any initial questions for any of the speakers that you heard today, except Christy? I don't think she's on anymore. You can put your questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand, or just come off mute because you all are very shy today. I'll go ahead and just let you know also that the recordings for each day will be up on the event website, and I'll be sending out a follow-up email either today or tomorrow that has the links to all the recordings, the links to the evaluation. So if you have to pop off and head out and don't have time to do the evaluation, that's fine. But a reminder that the evaluation is the only way to get the gift box with all the goodies in it. And you can fill that out until March 11th. And if you know folks who weren't able to make it this week but want to hop on in the next week or so and check out the recordings and fill out the evaluation to receive their gift box, that's totally okay. We realize that the timeline, having 3 days in a row of 2 hours a day, might not have worked for everybody's schedules, but we really appreciate all of you coming here. It really inspires me, it motivates me, because I've been working in technical assistance in the Eastern region for about 8 years now. And I'm pretty new to USET, but it's really great to see that things are just continuing to evolve, continuing to get better. I loved seeing at SARE the amount of work and effort that they're putting in the Northeast region to really improve and make those steps towards having better communication, relationships, and utilization of those programs. There's just so much opportunity, so much funding that is not being utilized right now. And hopefully through these relationships and through events like this, we'll start to see that shift, and we'll start to see these programs really benefiting the tribal enterprises and individual tribal citizen farms all across the USAID region and all across Turtle Island. And if you're not familiar with what Turtle Island is, it's basically North America. It's an indigenous term for North America that you'll hear a lot, especially among the Northeast Woodlands tribes or along the East Coast. All right. No questions, really? All right, well, if there are any thoughts, final thoughts from the speakers, any comments from anyone, I'll leave it open for another minute or two.
Hey, Leah. I just have one thing I wanted to add because it reminded me, and it was in my notes and I missed it, and it connects to what Jessica mentioned yesterday with St. Regis Mohawk and some of the importance around language with the SARE presentation that we just had. And I wanted to share a kind of success story that I think other tribal points of contact and Indigenous nations can use, which is, NRCS, we have assessment tools of how we look at, I'll use the example of water, right? So waters have different designations that are created by the federal government and the state government, but oftentimes tribal nations also have their own designations. So for instance, there is Farm Bill funding that is associated with and tied to source water protection. Perhaps on tribal lands, there isn't federally or state designated source water protection areas, but oftentimes an environmental department within a nation will have the tribe's own definition of a priority source water. And so you could use, and this gets to the sovereignty lens, perhaps to justify, okay, well, this isn't listed for the federal government and the state government, but the Seneca Nation has identified this as a priority for them. And in many cases, we can honor that. It goes back, the part that ties back to Jessica, St. Regis Mohawk had a plant list. So perhaps it's not a federally listed threatened endangered species, but perhaps it's a plant or animal that's culturally significant. If that's brought up in the planning process, that can change NRCS's ability to fund projects, because we're really taking those tribal assessments into consideration and not just what the federal government and the state has decided to be a priority. So I wanted to share that. That's something I've used in the past and it's been successful. So being creative and making sure you're including their definitions of what an Indigenous community wants to prioritize. So thank you.
That's a really important point to make. Thank you for sharing that, Nicole, that really the underlying mission of United South and Eastern Tribes, and therefore by extension me, my job is to protect the sovereignty of and support the sovereign development of tribal nations in the USAID region. And a lot of times that means looking at how language is used at the federal and state level, looking at how jurisdiction plays out, and trying to get to a point of cooperation and collaboration, because ultimately we have the same goal of protecting the land, conserving the resources, making sure that all of these amazing things are here for the next generations to come. And so keeping that in mind, that you are working with a tribal nation that has sovereign authority over its own lands, and that may not always align perfectly with your program, but finding a way to address that, finding a way to raise that issue so that that can be addressed is crucial to this work. And I really appreciate you bringing that up, Nicole. Thank you. All right. Well, you all are very shy, and that's okay. I really, really am so grateful for you coming to the summit, and I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your week and a great weekend. Onagiwa. See you later.